Hello students, this is Dr. Faizan Mirza. We are discussing control and coordination. When we are discussing control and coordination, we basically just need to recall how there are two controlling systems in the body, the nervous system and the endocrine system, the components that they are made up of and how one can be compared against the other. The components include that the nervous tissue is made up of neurons and nerves and brain and spinal cord, whereas the endocrine system is made up of secretory cells in the endocrine glands. How the information is transmitted. In nervous system, it is transmitted by electrical signals or electrical impulses in the neurons and across the neuron at the synapse through the chemicals which are released at the as the neurotransmitters. Endocrine system is about chemicals, the hormones which travel in body fluids, primarily blood, and they reach their target tissue. The speed of transmission is very fast in the nervous system, whereas it is much slower in the endocrine system. The duration of effect is often brief in nervous system, often brief, not always, but yes, often it's brief. And similarly, endocrine system, it's often very long, but again, keep in mind this is not always the case. Similarly, the breadth of effect. The effect lasts only for a few seconds only for a few seconds or a few minutes in the effector cells, and it lasts for a shorter duration. Whereas the in endocrine system, the effect lasts longer generally. Again, this is often, which means that this is not always the case. The nervous communication. What do you mean by nervous communication? Nervous communication means the communication which is done by the nervous system. Nervous system includes your brain and the spinal cord, which is your central nervous system, and all these nerves, which are the peripheral nervous system, together with the specialized organs. You have eyes, you have ears, you have nose, you have tongue, you have your skin, and all these are specialized, you can say, sense organs, which are also the part of your peripheral nervous system. So what are nerves? All these green pathways are shown in this diagram. Simplistically, these actually are your nerves. Nerves are the collection of neurons which are present and as a wrapped bundle running from one part of the body to other. So for example, if you can see this green line, it is traveling from the fingertip, and you can see it traveling all along the elbow to the shoulder and across the upper torso, and here it goes to the spinal cord and the central nervous system. So all these green lines are actually the nerves here. So your nervous system, the central nervous system, is constantly picking up information from various parts of the body, and the information is collected in the central nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord. The spinal cord then sends signals back to various parts of the body, and again the brain can also send signals to the various parts of the body. In spinal cord, the signals which are sent mostly, they are the ones which do not have your conscious control, and they are reflex arcs mostly, and the movement of your limbs. Whereas your brain here, it sends signals which include integrating information and then processing it and then sending the signals back to the various parts of the body. So what your nervous system is designed for? The nervous system is designed to respond to stimulus. Stimulus could either be external stimulus or internal stimulus. External stimulus means that anything that you sense out from outside the body, for example, the sound that's coming to your ears, or for example, the vision that you're getting from your eyes, or the smell that you're getting from your nose, or the taste that you're getting from on the tongue. Or for example, if you are touching an object, the touch sensation that you get at the end of your fingertips if you are brushing your fingers against, for example, wood, or for example, a tiled floor. And similarly, those are the touch receptors functioning. Similarly, you can just know if you touch an object which is very hot in temperature. So it stimulates the thermoreceptors in the skin. So your central nervous system quickly recognizes that you have touched something very hot, and that could damage your cells here. So you withdraw your hand very quickly. Similarly, from external source, you can just take an example of pain receptor which gets stimulated. For example, if your finger ends up hitting a pin or something, a sharp object. So these are all examples of external stimulus. What about internal stimulus? Internal stimulus is a stimulus which will rise up from within the body. For example, abdominal pain. For example, headache. For example, having gastric abnormality, where you can say you are having chest burn or heartburn in your abdomen, in the stomach, in the esophageal region, or probably you are, for example, your bladder is full and you just need to void urine. All these are stimulus which are generated within the body. Similarly, for example, if you hit your knee here and there's a bruise inside the body under the skin, so that's again an internal stimulus. It sends a signal to the nervous system that constantly there is a pain in your knees. So the stimulus could either be external or internal. The stimulus is received by receptors, which could be sense organs or the endings present in the sense organs. The impulse is transmitted through the neurons here. The sense organ can have the sensory neuron, or it can have a sensory receptor having a synapse with the sensory neuron, which then sends a signal to the central nervous system. The central nervous system then directs the impulses to the effector organs. Effector organs in the nervous system are always muscle or gland. Muscle contracts when it receives information or impulse from the nervous system, and a gland, it releases its secretion. The response of the nervous system is always either by contracting or by releasing its secretion. This diagram here shows you reflex arc. Now, what exactly is a reflex arc? In reflex arc, we take an example of how, for example, the shortest pathway which is taken by your neuronal pathway or impulses, and you subconsciously carry on an activity. For example, if your fingertip, this end of your finger, if you end up just hitting it at for example, a pin just pricks at this end, at the fingertip, and this was a sharp pin. So impulses are sent from this point, the pain receptors are stimulated, and this is the sensory neuron that takes the impulse from the fingertip to the central nervous system. Then comes an interneuron or the relay neuron, which then forms a synapse with the motor neuron. The motor neuron sends the signals back to the bicep muscle, and your biceps contract. When the biceps contract, you withdraw your hand, and this is the withdrawal reflex. This is your spinal cord. So you can see inside the spinal cord there is the ending of the sensory neuron, which is making a synapse with the relay neuron, and the relay neuron then making a synapse with the motor neuron. So all these parts are within the spinal cord, and then there are parts of the neuron which are beyond the spinal cord, which include this extended axon or dendron of the sensory neuron. More to it later, and this axon of the motor neuron as well. The synapse at the relay neuron or within the spinal cord can communicate the information of this pathway to the brain and receive it back from the brain, and again you can then take some conscious decision according to how the processing occurred in the brain. So these regions which I have shaded in green, they represent your central nervous system, and the ones that I have shaded in orange, they represent your peripheral nervous system. These are the three types of neurons here: the motor neuron, the sensory neuron, and the relay neuron. You can see that the sensory neuron is having these endings, and there is an axon in the cell body, and there is the axon ends. According to terminologies, this part, or the longer part of the sensory neuron extension, can be called dendron, and the shorter one is called axon. The impulse travels from the dendron to the axon, although in some terminologies dendron is now avoided, and we use the term of axon to mention both extensions of the sensory neuron. The cell body is somewhere nearer to one end as compared to the other end. When we discuss the motor neuron is having several dendrites here joined to the cell body. The cell body then extends in a long axon which ends at the axon terminals. The direction of impulse in motor neuron is always from the dendrites to the axon terminals. Coming to the relay neuron. Relay neuron is the neuron which is of various different shapes depending on which part of the brain you are talking about or which part of the body you are dealing with. So there is a great change in relay neurons from one part of the body to another part of the body. So this relay neuron here shows you a lot of dendritic spines here and a lot of dendrites. So this, you can say, it's taking information from this part to the next part. Here, if you go to the previous diagram, I discussed a relay neuron which was somewhat similar to a smaller motor neuron. This diagram here shows you the myelinated sensory neuron and a myelinated motor neuron. Coming to the sensory neuron first. So this sensory neuron here, you can see these are the synaptic endings, and these are the sensory endings. The sensory endings are the ones that receive the stimulus. For example, pain receptor. For example, the temperature receptor, the touch receptor. So you have sensory endings here. These sensory endings, once get stimulated, they transmit the impulse all along the sensory neuron to the synaptic endings. The direction of impulses in sensory neuron is always from the sensory endings to the synaptic endings. The dendron, or the part of axon which is from the sensory endings to the cell body, this is longer in most sensory neuron, and the one that follows the cell body to the synaptic endings is a bit shorter. Both can be called axon according to new terminologies. Otherwise, the first one can be called could usually be called as dendron as well. There are Schwann cells. They wrap up the long extensions of the neurons, and they insulate the neurons, so the transmission could occur at a very fast pace. These Schwann cells are typical cells of the supportive cells of the nervous system. They wrap around the axon. So this is the axon and the cytoplasm of the axon, and this membrane of the axon is called as the neurilemma. So the neurilemma is the neurilemma of the axon. You can see it's here. This is just the cell membrane of the axon. This is the other name, the neurilemma for this. So when you have the Schwann cell wrapping around, a Schwann cell wraps several times around one axon. So here it forms a myelin sheath. some regions have a same Schwann cell wrapped at various places. The region of this you can see here, the motor neuron. As I told you that the impulse in motor neuron travels from the dendrites to the terminal branches or the synaptic knob. This is called the axon terminal as well. You can see Schwann cells which are wrapped as myelin sheath all along the axon, and there are gaps in the between two adjacent myelin sheath, and this gap is called as the node of Ranvier. So this is the diagrammatic representation again of the reflex arc. The sensory receptors here and the sensory neuron, they take the impulse. Once they are stimulated, the impulse goes from the sensory receptor to the cell body, and from the cell body I head into the axon and to the terminal branches, the synaptic endings of the sensory neuron. Here it forms the synapse with the relay neuron. The relay neuron dendrite then take the information and the impulse is transmitted all along the relay neuron, and again the synapse is formed between this end of the relay neuron and the dendrites of the motor neuron. The motor neuron then gets stimulated, the dendrites they get stimulated, and from the cell body again the impulse travels from the motor neuron, from the dendrites all along the axon to the terminal branches in the synaptic knob to the effector. Effector in the nervous system could either be a muscle. If it's a muscle, the muscle will contract. If it's a gland, the gland would release secretions. That's it from my side. Thank you so much.